Welcome to the Flight Club Podcast, a woman's guide to leaning out. We give you a behind-the-scenes look at business launch and growth through the stories of successful female entrepreneurs. Here's your host, Felina Hansen, founder and CEO of Hera Hub.
Hello and welcome. I am really excited to share this story with you today. Bree Kochel is a fashion innovator. She's doing some really cool stuff. She has a company called Weecology Society. She's been selling on eBay for 7 years, and we'll get into the details of what that looks like. But she really is pioneering something that a lot of folks have been talking about in regards to sustainability, right? So we live in this very fast fashion society where so many garments end up in the landfill, which is horrible, right? And we need to be looking at other options to really build a more sustainable culture around fashion and retailing and what we buy and how we use things. So she goes by Bree K, and she is working on scaling the company into a brick and mortar store, looking to offer both buy, sell, and rent platforms. Kind of think of like a Buffalo Exchange meets Anthropology meets Rent the Runway, and really getting into helping people understand sustainability around fashion and ways to, again, really approach this industry in an entirely different way. So welcome to the show today, Bree.
Hi, Felina. Thank you so much for having me.
Sure. Awesome. Well, let's dive in. Let's go back. Where are you from? Where'd you go to school? And just, talk a little bit about your career path as it leads into launching this business.
Okay, so I actually grew up in a small town. It's called Sonora. It's about 70 miles out of Yosemite. Very beautiful area. So if you haven't been up there, I highly recommend anybody go up and visit it. I grew up up there, small town. I ended up going to a smaller CSU called CSU Stanislaus, where I majored in marketing. So I got my business degree. So it's kind of a funny story about how I actually landed in the business world, because I actually wanted to go to fashion school. Right out of high school, I actually was applying to go in to be a fashion designer, and I ended up meeting somebody that was a stylist from Hollywood, and they kind of put me on a path that said, if you already know how to make the clothes and do all that kind of stuff, you should probably learn how to run a business. So I kind of moved my mark, and I started going on the business trail.
Awesome. Fantastic. And what did that business trail look like?
So when I was probably about 19 years old, I started a small accessory line where I would sell out of a little booth at little markets and things like that. That was actually probably my first real business, I guess you would call it. And then right before that, I worked in retail. When I was 16, that was my first job, working in a retail environment. So I always loved working around clothes and that kind of thing. And then I always wanted to have my own business. And so it kind of all just connected. And I was like, you know what? I, think this is what I'm meant to do. So I just kind of got some good advice from people, and I started, looking into programs, and I stayed kind of local to where I grew up. I only went to college about an hour away, so I didn't do the whole going away to college thing, but it was nice to, be around my family while I got my undergrad degree. So I was excited about that. So a little bit about why I chose business. I knew I wanted to be in fashion, and I actually started sewing in high school when I was about 15 years old, but I knew I needed that other side of it to help me actually grow a business and be able to get into that environment with the day-to-day running of a business. And so that's why I kind of was like, I love fashion, but I need to learn the other aspect of the overall picture of where I was trying to go.
Absolutely. So how did you get involved in, tell us like the first time you decided to sell on eBay? What did you sell and what made you do that?
So it's actually a kind of a funny story. So I started selling back in 2006. My actual first account when I started selling on eBay started in 2006, and it was selling college textbooks. So when I was
Okay.
studying my business degree, I was actually selling my textbooks. So the books that I would
Good.
get at school that are expensive, I
Yeah.
actually started an eBay account because of that reason. And actually, me and my sister started actually making purses too. We would get fabric and make these cool purses, and then we would sell those on eBay because this is predating like Etsy. So
Yeah.
there was no Etsy around that time. And so that's actually how I started going on actually physically starting an eBay account, but actually starting selling clothing on eBay came several years later. And the reasoning why I did that is I actually had a mentor that was selling on eBay at the time. And he told me, oh my gosh, you have to get on eBay. It's great. There's, a ton of people using eBay. There's a lot of traffic on there. You can pretty much start a business, find, the items you want to sell and just start loading them, uploading them on there, making your ads. And he's like, it's super easy. There's people all over the world using eBay. And at the time I was like, oh, I just use it for college textbooks. I had never thought about selling clothes on there. So it was kind of a new, broad opening into the whole eBay experience, I guess, with the whole clothing and how to use it to market clothing on there.
Yeah, yeah. So you've been doing this for a while now. How did you decide on the apparel side of things what you wanted to sell on eBay? Did you see kind of a gap in the marketplace or a demand of some sort that drove you in a particular direction?
Yeah, so actually when I first started selling clothing on eBay, the 7 years ago, in 2012, I actually went up to the fashion district and I just started buying clothes and like new clothes that were wholesale and thinking, oh yeah, like I'll just, buy cute clothes, like put them on, model them, and, then the customers will come. And the thing with eBay is it's like a brand driven website. So I kind of noticed fast that a lot of the clothing that I was getting, like you would get people looking at it and buying it, but it was very like slow going. And so I ended up, thinking, well, I like going to, secondhand stores and I like going, to flea markets and things like that. And I'm like, there's so many used clothes like out there that, are just given away essentially. And so I started actually looking in the used clothes market. And at the time, I think like Poshmark had maybe just started to come out. And so it was one of those things where eBay had like a platform for selling clothing, but it wasn't like you could go on YouTube and find influencers that were talking about selling used clothing. So it was kind of before that time. So I ended up doing a lot of research about what was selling, what people were looking to buy, what styles were selling. And I just started really like spending probably hours, like a day, researching all that. And at the time I was working full time in an HR position. So I would work full time and then I would come home and I would study, what clothing was like selling. And then I would actually go to the secondhand stores and I would pick up clothing. And so over just time and kind of learning what, people were looking for and what was selling well and what other sellers were starting to, sell on their platforms and seeing all the sold items and just looking across the board about what people were looking for, and also men's clothing too. That is one side of fashion I think that kind of gets overlooked sometimes is the men's side, because men's side of fashion does do really well because a lot of guys, they want quick and they don't want to have to deal
they don't want to
with,
go shopping.
Exactly. So I kind of actually merged the two and I was like, there's kind of like a big, market for used clothing in men's and women's fashion. And so that's kind of how I started doing the used. And I've always been like very into like natural nature, that kind of thing. But I'm also very like into fashion and, colors and, makeup and those kind of things. So I kind of wanted to do something where it combined the two, where wearing used clothes isn't like wearing, old clothes, or it doesn't have to be quote unquote vintage. It can be newer styles and you can bring your own style into it.
Absolutely. How big is this problem, Bree? This problem of kind of, as I talked about in the intro, fast fashion and people just discarding clothing. What's been happening there?
So it's actually a pretty big problem. There's a lot of, I guess, research out there saying it's the second most polluting, or I've heard like the third and fourth. And so I usually try to say it's one of the top most polluting, I guess, industries, because the thing
Industries,
with
yeah.
exactly. The thing with fast fashion is you're looking at all aspects of kind of the industry, like to make the garment, one, you're using fossil fuels to make that fast fashion product. And then, so that's one of the industries that's top on the list of the most polluting. And then you have the transportation side to ship the items across, the globe to get it to the customer. So then that's another high industry on the list. And so that's kind of why it's hard to pinpoint exactly like what rank it is. And so I always just kind of broadly say it's top on the list of the most polluting. And the thing is there's a lot of campaigns now in the last couple of years on social media. I'm sure a lot of people have seen the Who Made Your Clothes and those kind of campaigns that say, who is really making our clothes? And if you really like kind of take a step back and you think about like the mindfulness of you're picking up that garment, and me personally being a seamstress or knowing how to sew and knowing how long it actually takes to make like a t-shirt even, or a skirt or something like that, it really puts into perspective like, wow, like a lot of these items that we go to the store and we look at, we put in our cart, it's just kind of like we don't really think about, oh, wow, it took somebody, this long to actually make it. And so I've actually been reaching out to some overseas factories and kind of chatting with them about, hey, how long does it actually take one person in an hour to make an item? And I kind of have been doing this like almost like reporter style back end like investigation to really dig deep into this issue, not just, the chemicals that are being used to produce these clothes, but also, the people that are behind the clothes and who's making them. And actually one of my jobs, I was a store manager for a bigger retail store. And I remember we would get these boxes, like we would get all of our inventory in these boxes and we would open them. And I just remember this like chemically smell, like coming off the clothes and thinking, oh my gosh, like we're putting this on our bodies, and so kind of going deeper than just the actual shirt or the dress we're wearing and actually looking at how that's actually manufactured is important.
Oh, so important. Yeah, it's so interesting. I taught at the Fashion Institute of Design and Merchandising for 8 years, and I taught on the business side, entrepreneurship and marketing. So I myself never, got a real deep dive onto the manufacturing, design side, if you will. But the little I learned there definitely affected my thinking. And I think it just the consciousness of, the next generation, right? Of folks like you and other people who are really thinking about this in critical ways, which is so important. Like you said, it's one of the biggest polluters. The dyes that they're using, the chemicals they're using, all end up in our water supply and all of these things. So it's such an important conversation, and it's so interesting. So I grew up in California as well, also in a small town, and my mom was this big thrift store shopper. In fact, my whole family still is on my mom's side. And as a kid, I was like, I kind of was embarrassed about it, to be honest. I was like, oh, we're going to thrift stores to buy clothes. But my mom, she was a hippie basically, and also felt the same. She wanted to reuse and recycle. And now I look back and I'm like, wow, my mom was awesome. Like, what a pioneer, right? Because, now that's what we're seeing. A lot of people like yourself that are really, if somebody doesn't have time to go do all that digging through secondhand stores, they can come to you and find kind of the best of the best.
Exactly. I love that you said that, like, growing up and you had, a mom that was really into secondhand shopping and like having that background in it. And like you said, I think there is like this cliche to it, or I don't know if you'd call it a cliche or whatever, but the term would be, but it's almost like the stigma around shopping, secondhand, and that it's like dirty clothes and smelly clothes and that kind of thing. And actually the turning point for me, it was like, I'm working at this brand and we're getting these boxes and the clothes are smelling like chemicals. So is it really that much worse that you're buying secondhand clothes that may smell a little bit that you can wash off, versus putting chemicals, something like that. And so it's kind of, this parallel of, initially the clothes are getting, filled with these chemicals, but really buying it secondhand and somebody else used it briefly. And the other like shocking thing is, there was like a statistic I saw, and it was like the average person wears an item 7 times. And so when you think about 7 times, that's not a lot at all.
No.
And so it's almost like disposable, like we're literally like wearing something for like maybe a day, a couple days to get the photos. And the other thing is because social media is so big, like people don't like to be photographed in something more than once or twice. And so that's another reason, like now that, we're taking pictures, we're putting them on Instagram, Facebook, those kind of things. A lot of people have the stigma around, I can't wear that item, in another picture or at another event. And so now there's like this disposable, idea of, I just have to get rid of it. But, with my business, I'm really trying to, make it circular and make it about, there's a term called the circular economy, and it's starting to get a lot of momentum right now. And so I actually want to be like, maybe, I don't know if anybody's done it yet, but maybe the first circular retailer. And so that would mean when you come into the store, you can exchange your items, you can sell your items, you can buy reused items, everything in there is sustainably made. And so I thought of this concept, as I was selling a lot of these used clothes, and I'm thinking, there's all these other industries like in, sustainability that need airtime too, cosmetics, like all sorts of things. And so that's kind of getting, ahead of myself, but it's a big thing, and I think it's getting momentum, but I still think it has a long way to go. The stigma still needs time to kind of wear off and actually make, like, I'm trying to actually make sustainably cool, like being sustainable, living, being sustainable, like in itself a cool thing, like a mainstream thing.
Yeah, absolutely. It's so interesting you say that, Bree. I never really correlated fast fashion and, the stat people wear something on average 7 times to the rise of social media. It's so interesting. That's something actually has not crossed my mind, in that like, oh, I can't wear this again because I've been in a picture in it. But I could see where some people would, feel that way, which is sad, but it is what it is. So, and this idea too, I've seen a lot of folks that are, editing garments, right? Like taking something that's a secondhand garment and then adding to it or editing it in some way. Is that anything that you've gotten into as well?
Yeah, so actually, my brand, We Called You Society, I call it a sustainable lifestyle brand, but I actually have T-shirts. So I go out to all the secondhand stores, consignment shops, flea markets, things like that, and I actually pick up T-shirts that are pre-owned, good condition, so they don't have stains, holes, that kind of thing in them, and I actually screen print them in my workspace. And I screen print them with eco-friendly water-based inks. So that's one thing, like on my website, my social media, that I do promote is reusing actual items for your brand. So instead of, manufacturing something brand new, I actually will reuse an item, reuse T-shirts, screen print them with my logo, with sayings, eco-friendly sayings on them. And I actually am starting to get into actually buying secondhand items and modifying them a little bit and then reselling those items. There is some things that go along with that, just because there's brand protection. So you have to make sure that you aren't modifying the item too much, or if there's a logo from that other company, you just have to make sure you're, taking into account like those kind of things. But it is something, and then I want to get into, and eventually I actually want to start manufacturing that we call Juice Society line that would be made from 100% sustainable or 100% recycled materials as well.
Awesome. I love it. Yeah, I had this conversation recently with another Hera Hub member who manufactures a women's athletic line called Vivacity Sportswear, and she's using a lot of materials now that, plastic bottles now are being made into athletic, performance materials. It's really, really fantastic to see all the innovation that's happened in the apparel space. Just, it feels like has accelerated maybe over the last 5 years or so.
Yeah, exactly. And I've noticed that too. Like when I started years ago, when I started looking into sustainability, there wasn't a lot out there. Like you couldn't really Google like recycled materials items or recycled material clothing. And it was one of those things like you would get a couple articles or a couple companies would come up, but it wasn't something that was really happening a lot. Like it wasn't like you could find several, brands that were doing it. And now in the last probably 2 years, it's really like becoming huge, which is amazing. And there's actually a company up in San Francisco called Marine Layer, and they're actually taking cotton shirts and that were recycled from customers, and they're mulching them down and they're reusing that cotton to respin new shirts. And so that's an amazing concept. And it's funny because years ago, I even had this dream of doing something similar to that. And so it's mainly about implementation for me and taking these, goals of mine and actually putting them into fruition and getting them going and the momentum and those kind of things. And so I'm super excited for the, sustainable community and the fashion, sustainable community and seeing, everything that everybody's coming up with. And I've also seen a couple articles about using different type of plant-based materials, pineapple leather being one of them, which is really cool. So
that's cool.
Kind of exploring all that, all those avenues of, these different types of textiles and like what, can be used to make, our clothing essentially.
Yeah, absolutely. And we've come so far from leather. It's pretty incredible.
Exactly.
Wow. Well, good. Well, I want to talk about, Bree, kind of the path that you took. I know you started your business about 7 years ago, but you worked as well full-time for the first 5 years of that, and now have been full-time focused on the business for the last couple years. Just from an advice standpoint, for somebody who's thinking, I want to do something like this is exciting. This idea of kind of, as we call it, the side hustle now. You side hustled for 5 years. What did that do for you? And what was that point you knew, like, okay, I'm in it. I'm going to quit everything else and just focus on this?
Yeah. So I moved to San Diego in 2012, and shortly after that, I got a job working in HR. And it was funny because it was one of those things like when you're told growing up, like you go to college, then right after college, you go work for somebody, and then you work there for 40 years, then you get your retirement, and then that's when you can start traveling and live your life kind of thing. And so I kind of had that, like, my parents are amazing and like, always supported everything like me and my sisters, wanted to do in our lives. But it was one thing was they wanted us to all go to college and graduate and, go work, in a good career, And so I started working in HR, and I remember just I'm not a desk person, like sitting in a cubicle, and I can sit at a, computer and do work and that kind of thing, but I'm really not an office person per se. And so I remember actually being at my job. I had been in HR for about 3.5 years at that point, and sitting there and literally hearing the clock. Like, it was like I didn't have my music on that day, and just hearing the clock like literally go click, 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 and thinking, this is my life. Like, is this what I want to do for the rest of my life? Is it something that I'm passionate about? And I know, like, with the millennials, like, it's all about, older generation thinking, all those millennials, they just think they can do whatever they love and, whatever the best, like the things that we think we can make money doing because it's our passions. You always hear like passion projects, but to me, I really think it's a real thing. Like, it's not just us millennials that are thinking, oh yeah, I want to just, make money and do what I love the rest of my life. I think that it was one of those turning points where I had been selling on eBay for the 5 years, and there was some months that I was actually making more money on eBay than I was at my full-time job. But really, it's fear. It was fear that was holding me back, and I think that's a big, with a lot of people. And with me, I didn't have children or a family that I was supporting, particularly at that time. So it was an easier transition for me than to tell somebody, that they need their health benefits, they need all those things, to say, oh yeah, just quit and follow your dreams, And so
Yeah.
one of the big pieces of advice I can give people is to start small and start on the side. Start that thing that you're passionate about, whether, you're into art and you really, want to start painting, just start painting on nights and weekends. And if it's something, like you really love to help people, like get involved into a nonprofit and go to their meetings and start seeing, how that all works out. And then maybe one day, like if your dream is to start a nonprofit, you'll kind of have that ability to see, because you've been doing it on the side for, however long you have, you can kind of transition into it easier. And I actually have a couple of friends, that I talk to, and they've always kind of wanted to, follow like a passion of theirs. And so I'm always like, do it, just start, because I know that a lot of people have heard this a lot, but starting is the hardest part. But once you start and you just go for it, like, it's life-changing, and you'll see that the things that you can accomplish are so much bigger than you really think you could.
Yeah. Awesome advice. I love it. Just get started. So, Bree, as you continue to evolve and grow your business, you've got this awesome t-shirt line. You're looking at, I'm sure continuing to sell online, but also to bring this into a brick and mortar store as well. Talk about that a little bit, some of the things that are on the horizon for your business.
Yeah, so right now I actually work out of like an industrial small workspace, and so that's where I create, design, and screen print all my shirts. So I have like a little screen printer in there, and then I also have all my inventory for eBay that I sell in the same work spot. And so what I'm trying to actually grow right now, I guess my 6 to 12-month plan is to actually start growing the We Ecology Society social entrepreneurship program. And so I'm actually reaching out to a lot of eco and green nonprofits and other businesses that are in that green space like me, and do like strategic partnerships. And so I've actually done a couple pop-ups in the community in San Diego with kind of environmental friendly pop-up groups at businesses that are eco-friendly. And then I'm also trying to kind of launch my own. So it would be like a green market where I would have like a lot of different people from the sustainable industry kind of come together, whether they're nonprofits, other businesses in that space, or people that, are just like love the sustainable lifestyle, would come together and have, an educational workshops and different things, to kind of network with each other and kind of grow from there. So I kind of picture it being almost like a farmer's market, but a sustainable market. So it would all be like sustainable vendors that are all kind of in that space. And then my 2-year, I guess, goal is to have a brick and mortar store open, and then from there just grow the We Ecology Society name. I'm really big on like community, and education is one of my other big goals. And so I am a fashion brand, but I also think education is huge, especially with sustainability, because I think there's a lot out there right now. Kind of, we were talking about it earlier about how there's that stigma around, living sustainably, and almost like this look to it, like where you don't have to be this super like natural, like hippie, person, which, I actually identify, I guess, like hippies are great. Like, I have like a lot of friends that are, but, and, me myself, I would consider, but I also think it's important to not put like a specific I guess, look to sustainability or like the green living space. I think that, wearing makeup or wanting to wear a lot of color in your wardrobe and those kind of things, like you don't have to be just wearing like the muted tones or basic tones.
Yeah.
There's like a lot to
a burlap
the whole
sack. No.
Exactly. And I think that's another, when people hear like a green eco-friendly brand, they think, oh gosh, like not another one. Like I don't want to wear, like natural colored linen. Like I'm over that look, or, maybe that's not their look. Maybe they like love to wear lace or embroidery. And so, I do. So I think it's one of those things where bringing that other part into it and saying, hey, you can still live your lifestyle that you love, but there's just these tweaks you can make to be sustainable, whether it's in your household or in your wardrobe or, even in your business. I think that's a huge thing too, is just, kind of greening your life, I guess, would be the term.
Yeah. I love it. Awesome. Well, I'm so excited for you, Bree. You're doing so many amazing things, and I know more to come. Thank you so much for sharing a bit of your story with us today.
Well, thank you. I really appreciate it.
Thank you for joining this week's episode of Flight Club, sponsored by Hera Hub. We look forward to sharing more success stories with you soon.